Section 6 of 3 SF Short Stories by Paul W. Fairman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Secrets of the Martians, Part 3. Perhaps it was Tommy's luck that carried the party through. On the trip to the cell blocks they met only two other Martians, not soldiers, who exhibited only mild curiosity. Once on the lower tier, Maxis seemed more at home. "This is the likeliest cell block," he said. "But we can't search all those cells," Tommy said. "It would take hours. Surely we'd be stopped." He was looking down a long corridor lined with bars. Other corridors intersected until the place was a maze. "You're right," Maxis said. "I have a plan that may save us time. Come, you two walk behind me now." They moved down the corridor. Only one guard lay in their path, but he was down on his haunches, asleep. They glided past him, Max's gun held ready. They moved on until they were approaching a more brightly lighted intersection. A small table was located against the bars of a corner cell, and a Martian sat at the table occupied with some papers. The trio approached from behind the man quietly. He heard them when they were a few steps away. He turned. Maxis took a last bold step and was towering over the seated one. Maxis spoke casually, but with authority. "I've been sent to deliver Fanton to the council hall." Maxis did not expect cooperation from the guard, but he hoped for something else. His eyes were on the guard's face, watching for the man's first reaction. It was entirely satisfactory from Max's point of view. The guard's startled eyes widened, then narrowed in suspicion. "Who sent you for him?" Maxis smiled without humor. "Then he's here. He does live. What cell, you mother's mistake? Quick!" The guard looked into the barrel of the deadly gun Maxis held close to his face. A black hole from whence could come needle flames that would burn his head into an instantaneous crisp. "The third aisle, cell 8. The gun in Maxis's hand spit a small blue flame. For a moment, the guard's head was enveloped in fire. Then the head was gone. Helen Spencer recoiled in horror. Maxis said, "He was a traitor." To the Martian, that justified everything. He bent over and picked up the headless body and carried it to the nearest cell. He turned and said to Tommy, "This is the dangerous moment. You must help me. Do exactly as I say. You must go to the cell and bring Fanton back to this table. I must wait here." Tommy was perplexed. "I don't get it." "You should be better able to get him out of his cell. If we meet a guard, he'll stop us." "No, he won't. He'll bring you here. All authority in the block stems from this key center. If you meet a guard, tell him you are under orders from the keykeeper. He will be suspicious and completely confounded, but he will bring you here. In the meantime, I can better stave off trouble with the authority this post gives me." Maxis looked at Helen and pointed. "You, into that cell, out of sight. Stay there until we have either succeeded or failed." His face was grim. "If we fail, you must shift for yourself with nothing but my good wishes to help you on your way." His tone indicated his good wishes would be scant of aid. He laid a hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Walk to the next intersection down that corridor. Turn to your right and count off 7 cells. Fanton will be in the 8th. Good luck." Tommy took the key Maxis handed him and started off as directed. The key seemed very heavy. The corridor seemed very long. The task set for him seemed next to impossible. He reached the cell without trouble. He unlocked the door. Inside, a very old Martian lay in filth and rags on the floor. Tommy knelt beside him, his heart pounding. "You are to come with me," he said. The old Martian opened his eyes. "Who are you?" "I'm Tommy Wilkes, a Terran, but that doesn't matter. Maxis, one of your friends, is waiting at the table down the hall. "Can you walk, sir?" A tired smile brightened the old Martian's face. "Strange indeed are our times, when a Terran juvenile comes to the aid of the Lord of the North Hemisphere. The times have gone mad, and we can only go where destiny directs, or seems to." Fanton, with Tommy's aid, had got to his feet, and Tommy helped him from the cell. But now there was a barrier. 3 scowling Martian guards. One of them barked a challenge in his own language. "Don't say anything," Tommy warned Fanton. "Maxis said it might work out like this." To the Martian he said, "I've been sent to bring the prisoner," but he knew the Martian did not understand him. The 3 spoke among themselves, their confusion quite obvious. Then it worked exactly as Maxis had hoped. At a command from one, the other 2 guards took Tommy and Fanton each by an arm and hauled them along the corridor toward the key center. As they approached it, Tommy saw that Maxis had gotten to his feet and was waiting for them. The grim Martian stood with both hands behind his back. As they came to a halt, the leader of the trio spoke questioningly to Maxis in their own language. Before Maxis could answer, the other's eyes opened wide, and Tommy knew what was going on in his mind. He was recognizing Maxis as a false keykeeper. The leader got short satisfaction from his discovery. He died with his questions still unanswered as Maxis brought his right arm around and blasted the man's head into a cinder. The other 2 guards fell away quickly, their reflexes in perfect condition. Both snatched for their guns. One was going down as Maxis' ray cut him in 2. The other guard was bringing his gun up. Maxis had no time to match shots with him, or perhaps chose not to from a certainty that both of them would die as a result. Instead, he hurled himself on the guard and caught the latter's wrist, bending the gun away from himself and the others. The guard was far heavier than Maxis, his bulk possessed of greater strength. He dropped the gun, but heaved Maxis to one side and came down heavily upon him. He had trapped Maxis's arm successfully, and it was a matter of moments before he would again have the gun in his fist. Tommy acted from desperation, without plan. A heavy ring of keys lay on the desk. Tommy snatched them up and swung them, from high over his head, down hard on the skull of the guard. The guard's head was indeed hard. The keys rang dully against it, but the guard's hand only faltered in reaching for the gun. Tommy swung the keys again and again. Unable to grip the gun, the guard reached with both hands, thus losing his hold on Maxis for a moment. The moment was enough. Suddenly the guard stiffened and came awkwardly erect. There was an empty look in his eyes, and then Tommy saw the reason. The handle of a dagger protruded from his chest, driven in by Maxis, who was even now rolling the corpse over and coming free. Maxis sheathed his dagger, still dripping blood. He snapped, "We've got to move fast. Now all we have to go on is hope." Helen came from the cell as Tommy asked, "Where are we going?" "We've got to get Fanton to the place of eternal strength. Come." He took the old Martian in his arms, and the cavalcade moved off down the corridor, following Max's lead. Guards could be heard, running in from different directions. To Maxis, it was but a matter of time. He did not expect to reach the place of eternal strength. He could only try, and die finally, battling for his emperor. But this did not sadden him. There was no better way for a Martian to die. Rex floated in a sea of pain. Sadistically beaten by the guards who had overpowered him, he lay on the floor of the cell, aware of the blood pool around him and of the pain, but unable to force his body into action. He knew the door to the cell stood open. He forced his mind to focus on this point. It could mean only one thing. The guards had left him for dead. The thought cheered him. He was not dead. Therefore he was living on borrowed time, a break men in his profession seldom got. Another thought intruded. Maybe he wasn't lucky. Maybe he was crippled. He had as yet not inventoried the damage. Was it worse than the pain indicated? He searched for numbness and found none. He moved and the pain increased. That was good. Nothing paralyzed. But was an arm or leg broken? Was there a spine injury? Resolutely he forced his muscles to respond. Arms, legs, bones okay. He got to his feet and swayed dizzily. Pain shot through his head. He almost blacked out, clawed at the wall, kept himself from falling. He got hold of a bar and held himself erect while the floor spun and the walls tilted. Then they steadied away. His stomach settled back into place, the nausea giving ground sullenly. After a while he decided he was all right as he would be for a long time. He looked around for a weapon. All the bars were in solid rock. The legs of the bunk were riveted down. He hunted and stood finally looking at his two fists. They were all he had. They would have to do. He stepped out of his cell and saw two guards approaching along the corridor. He debated flight. He stopped. There were two fists. Might as well find out right now how effective they would be. He crouched and stood waiting. Jean moved in a daze. She had been taken by the Martian guard through long corridors into a splendid part of whatever building this was. At one point during the trip, she lashed out suddenly, bit the hand across her mouth, and raked her nails across a hard face. The Martians had been in no mood to tame a tigress the gentle way. The big Martian, after snarling from the bite, swung his other fist viciously. The blow rang against Jean's head. She fell. The Martians growled at each other, picked her up roughly, and carried her, half conscious, on down the corridor. She was taken to a high room, far up in the building. The room seemed to be some sort of a storage place for fine garments. They were everywhere. Gold surplices, hanging in rows. Gold and silver sandals hanging from pegs along the wall. A rich room with windows and daylight coming in, the first Jean had seen in a long time. She remembered the stone hutch, so wondrous, so far away, so unattainable. Rex. Tears welled in Jean's eyes, and she tasted the dregs of bitterness as she saw Rex, in memory, lying bloody and broken on the floor of the cell. Recalled the ferocity with which the Martians had attacked him. Suddenly Jean realized what was going on, what the Martians were doing there in the high room, stripping off her clothing. With a choked cry she found new strength and fought again. She took them by surprise, broke from them and ran, half naked, toward the door. Escape seemed imminent, but she threw herself straight into the arms of a tall, scowling Martian who held her like a child and carried her back into the terrible room. As he walked toward them, those who had brought her here fell to their knees. One of them intoned, "Pandek, great Pandek, Lord of the North Hemisphere." "Not quite," Pandek said, speaking in Terran. "And never if I continue to be surrounded by bungling fools such as you, who cannot hold a slip of a girl. Had I not come through that door, she would even now be making her escape." "She surprised us, great Pandek. It will not happen again." Callously, Pandek held Jean forth with one great hand and hit her sharply on the point of her chin with a doubled fist. "I'll make certain of that. Here, take her. Maybe you will be safer with an unconscious sacrifice. Comb out her hair. Wash her body. Put on the golden harness. Get her ready for the knife." They took Jean from him and laid her on a marble slab and continued their ministrations. Pandek, scowling deeply, walked to the window and looked out. Beyond and below was a great open square filled with people. They milled about a high, central platform on which sat a throne and a sacrificial block. The block was caked with the blood of 1,000 sacrifices made before the Reformation, centuries before. It had been removed from the square, but had been carefully preserved by a corps of fanatics who had never given up hope of the old regime coming again into power. The old, bloody regime that worshipped the robust pagan gods and gave the people great spectacles. Now the block had been returned. The minds of the people had been inflamed, and they waited for the first sacrifice of the new age, the age in which proud pagan Mars would again demand its rightful place in the sun. Pandec's hand thrilled for the feel of the knife. He thrilled at the thought of driving it home and thus ushering in the new age. His mind went, quite naturally, to Fanton, the weak old fool he had dragged down. It had been a clever coup. Of course, Fanton still had followers, but they had been misled, lied to, cleverly hoodwinked. A little fearful of a slip in his plans, Pandec had not had Fanton slain. He had merely thrown the old fool into a cell to die, had deprived him of rejuvenation. Perhaps Fanton was already dead. Pandec wondered. But perhaps not, and with his plans having gone forward so smoothly, it was safe to kill the disposed lord of the northern hemisphere. Pandec turned swiftly and went to see about it. Maxus, leading his cavalcade down the prison corridor and carrying the even frailer body of his emperor, traveled half the breadth of the prison before danger confronted him. 3 guards loyal to Pandec the usurper and dedicated to his treacherous cause. Maxus laid the body of Fanton gently upon the floor. Then he stepped over it and made his stand between his emperor and those who had deserted him. He paid no attention to the 2 Terrans. He wished them neither harm nor good fortune. They would be of no value in this fight, so he forgot them. The guards, sure of their advantage, moved slowly forward. They knew Maxus and gave him a tribute by taking it for granted he would not retreat. They drew their short, wicked swords, thus forcing Maxus, a man of ethics, to forswear use of any other weapon even though death faced him. The Martians moved in from 3 angles, skillful swordsmen all, and Maxus parried 3 quick thrusts with a tricky maneuver that left a scratch on the arm of one guard. It was a gallant parry, worthy of a better reward than certain death. The guards retreated a step, set themselves, and moved in again. Maxus would certainly not be able to repeat the maneuver. Then there was a new, sudden, and devastating action. From the rear of the guards came a crazed, unarmed juggernaut of destruction, a mad Terran, bloody, savage-eyed, lethal. He threw himself against the flank of the advancing trio, locked an arm around his throat, and with leverage obtained by wrapping his legs around the Martian's body, snapped the ugly head at the base of the spine. The Martian fell with the Terran under him. As Tommy cried, "Rex, Rex, where did you come from?" the Terran had disentangled himself from the corpse and was engaging a second guard. Stunned by the suddenness of the attacks, the guard was easy prey for the Terran's death grip. A second spine snapped, and as the Terran rose, he saw that the third guard had fallen before Maxus' sword. Maxus said, "Your aid was indeed timely." Rex wiped blood from his face and advanced like a great cat. "What are you doing with these people?" Tommy rushed forward. "It's all right, Rex. This is our friend. The old man is the Lord of the North Hemisphere. Maxus is trying to save his life. This is Helen Spencer. They were going to kill her." Maxus had again taken Fanton in his arms. "We have no time to discuss these things. Find a gun on one of those bodies and follow." He moved swiftly down the corridor. Tommy and Helen Spencer followed, but Rex strode forward until he was abreast of the Martian. "Where are we going?" There was suspicion and hostility in his voice, as though he suspected a trick. "I can't go into detail," Maxus said, "but believe me, Our chances of survival lie in reaching a ray fountain we call the place of eternal strength. The Emperor's life is at stake and ours also." As though on cue, 2 guards appeared from a cross corridor. Grinning mirthlessly, Rex turned the gun on them. It spat forth a crackling ray that cut them in the middle and brought the upper halves of their bodies toppling to the floor. "Now lead the way," Rex said. He killed 4 more guards before they arrived at the place of eternal strength, shooting them in the back without compunction as he stalked ahead of Rex, clearing the way. Upon arrival at their destination, Tommy cried, "Why, this is the place where my arm was healed. I had a wound and then it was gone." Maxis laid the body of Fanton on a marble couch under the singing colored rays. "Even greater miracles are achieved here," he said. "It heals all ills, even old age. If a spark of life remains in a body, the fountain greatens and strengthens it." Rex stared in wonder. "Will it revive the dead?" "No, it will preserve a dead body, cause it to remain perfect for centuries, but once life is gone, it can never be returned." "Then this is what happened to Professor Spencer. He was killed and placed under this ray." Maxis nodded sadly. "Brutally murdered. It was Pandek's signal for his great coup. We were caught completely unawares. He acted very cleverly and told us Fanton had died, refusing rejuvenation, when in truth he had deprived Fanton of the fountain's healing power. Only today did I discover that Fanton still lived." Rex was staring at the body of the ancient ruler. "How long does the process take?" "A matter of minutes. Let's only hope that those minutes are afforded us." "There are still some shots in my gun," Rex said. They waited, while the body of Fanton seemed to visibly recharge itself. 2 guards appeared. Rex killed them. "How was this rebellion allowed to get started?" he asked. There was a grim look upon Max's face. "Through laxness, through carelessness, from stopping our ears against the sound of treacherous undercurrents, from feeling that young hotheads were basically sound and would not arrange their own destruction and ours too. This Pandek you speak of, he planned to move against the Terrans to the south? He still plans it. He has vowed to wipe every alien from the planet and establish a new age of Martian resurgence. The Martians would be annihilated. Pandek is willing to gamble on that." "He must be insane," Rex said. "It began when Fanton advocated a change in Martian policy. For centuries, ever since the Terrans came, our course has been one of proud isolation. The policy was instituted centuries ago by ill-advised leaders, and Fanton carried it on against his better judgment. When he began talking of a reversal, the underground mutiny gained in strength. Will saving Fanton's life stop the rebellion? This thing we do is only a feeble step in the right direction. Even with Fanton strong and healthy, we may not be able to win. What's this sacrifice business? It's supposed to take place in the public square, an old barbaric rite in which a maiden is slain and the people file by and bathe their hands in her blood. It will be the signal for the final act of overthrow, when the rebels come into the open and slay all who remain faithful to Fanton." A new voice spoke. The 2 men turned. Fanton was sitting on the edge of the marble couch. Helen and Tommy were staring at him. Fanton's words were for Maxis. "You have done well. If I'd known before where loyalty lay, things might have been different." Maxis dropped to one knee. He bowed his head. "My lord." "No time for this. I must get to the council." "It will be very dangerous." "But the uprising must be beaten down. The council is still loyal. They must see that I am alive." Rex said, "I think you'll find." Fanton waved him to silence. "We must hurry." As the group left the place of eternal strength, Maxis said, "Perhaps they will have to be assembled, if they are not in session." "They must be in session." On the trip to the amphitheater of the gods, 2 rebels were killed and 1 loyal Martian added to the cavalcade. As they moved into the great hall, Fanton said, "They are here." This appeared to be true. The seats flanking the central throne were still occupied. The throne itself was vacant. Immediately upon entering the great hall, Rex ran forward and climbed to the tier of benches. The council members sat silent, unmoving. Rex pushed the body of the nearest one. It tumbled off the bench like a sack of grain and fell to the floor. Fanton paled. "What does this mean?" "They're all dead," Rex replied. "When we were here before, I noticed that none of them moved or spoke. This is the work of a madman, Pandek. This is his joke. He rules all alone." Maxis said, "You will have to try and escape, my lord. You must get to the Terrans and tell your story." Fanton considered. "If I run like a coward, thousands of loyal Martians will die. Their blood will be on my hands." "That's not true," Rex said sharply. Further talk was interrupted by the sound of men approaching at a run. Fanton turned and pointed. "Behind that pillar, there's a small door that leads to an observatory platform above the square. Only my father knew of the stairway behind the wall." Fanton pressed a carved leaf in a decoration on the pillar, and a small section of the seemingly unbroken wall moved inward. Fanton entered, and the rest followed with Rex and Maxis and the new recruit bringing up the rear. Maxis said, "I will stay here and fight. I'm tired of running away." Rex dragged him into the opening. "Don't be a fool. There's a time to fight and a time to run. This is a time to run." As the wall section slid back into place, Fanton indicated a stairway a short distance down the narrow corridor. Rex said to Maxis, "You go ahead to guard Fanton. This new man and I will stay here in case Fanton and his father weren't the only ones who knew about that opening. I think whoever was coming heard us leave." Maxis was prepared to object. He hesitated, watching Fanton. Tommy and Helen moved up the circular stairway. "Go ahead," Rex snapped. "You don't know who may be up there." Scowling, Maxis turned suddenly and took the stairs 3 at a time. Rex and the loyal Martian had a short wait. The sound of the others had scarcely died out above, when the panel opened again. "I was right," Rex whispered. "Stand on the other side." The 2 defenders had the advantage of a comparatively dim interior, that and the remaining charges in Rex's gun. 3 guards crowded into the narrow passageway. As they saw Rex standing by the stairway, he dropped to the floor and fired at an upward angle. His lethal charges cut the 2 forward guards to pieces. The third one, though confused, was more alert. He also had a gun and looked desperately around for a target. The loyal Martian thrust viciously with his sword. He missed. The guard danced away. Rex brought his gun around, but hesitated with the loyal Martian in his range of fire. When he maneuvered a clear shot, he pressed the switch. Nothing happened. The gun was empty. In the meantime, the guard brought his gun around to bear on the Martian. The latter made a second desperate thrust. It went home, but only as the Martian fell dead from the guard's last shot. Rex got to his feet, wiping sweat from his face. And at that moment, Pandek stepped into the passageway. Instantly, Rex leaped for the fallen guard's gun. Pandek smiled contemptuously and kicked it far down the passageway. Pandek apprised the situation swiftly. He said, "Pick up the sword, Terran scum." Without reply, Rex bent down and did as directed. "Are you skilled in its use?" Pandek asked. "Never had one in my hand before." Pandek raised his own sword, identical to the one Rex held. "Then I'm afraid the contest will be rather unequal," he said, and moved toward Rex. "On guard. It will be a great pleasure to kill you." Rex took a backward step. He was no match for Pandek with these weapons. Pandek would be a master at close swordsmanship. This had to be true. Otherwise Pandic would not be so eager to engage him. Rex thought of the headquarters on Earth, of Professor Spencer. So still, so peaceful in that box. So dead. Would he go back to Terra the same way? With Phantom's hiding place known to Pandic, the rebellion seemed assured of success, as certain as his own death at Pandic's hands. He took another backward step. Jean was ready for the sacrifice. She had been dressed in a rich golden harness and wore golden manacles on her wrists. She had waited in the room with the sound of the crowds in the great court below rising in volume as their impatience increased. Finally a door opened. A tall, resplendent figure entered. He wore a jeweled cloak that swept the floor. A hideous golden mask covered his face. There were 2 attending priests with Jean. They dropped to their knees and lowered their eyes. One of them intoned, "Great Pandic, Lord of the Northern Hemisphere, the sacrifice is ready for your knife." The room grew hazy before Jean's eyes. It spun in a sickening swirl as she slipped to the floor in a dead faint. When she regained consciousness, Jean found herself under an archway in the court below. The great square was jammed with howling Martians. A long red carpet stretched from the archway to the platform in the center of the square. The sting of a sharp odor in her nostrils told Jean how she had been revived. A priest on either side now supported her. They moved forward from the building toward the platform. Evidently, she could either walk or be dragged. She preferred to walk. She raised her head high and matched the priest's step for step. The crowd pressed close to the red carpet on either side. Unbroken lines of guards held the Martians back. To Jean, they seemed things out of a nightmare. They reached the steps leading up to the platform. 5 steps. She counted them as she ascended. The marble block. The priest laid her along its length. The golden manacles were removed. Each priest took an arm and held her to the slab with the tall masked figure raising his knife and looking down at her. The knife arched. Then, halfway in its descent toward her bared breast, it stopped. The masked figure looked up toward the high wall of the building. He shrank backward, pointed with the knife as he cringed away. A dramatic gesture that turned every eye in the square toward a small balcony high on the wall. A cry went up. A single word. "Phantom!" The true lord of the Northern Hemisphere stood with his arms stretched out imperiously over the crowd below. He held this position until the roaring died away and a whisper could have been heard in the great square. Then he spoke. "Hear your emperor now. You have been lied to by those who would destroy you. You have been told I was dead and that a new order would prevail among you. An old, outdated order that brought only blood and suffering in its time. I tell you now that those who spoke thus were traitors, who sought to exploit your suffering to their cruel ends. The leader of these was Pandic, a prince I trusted. I now declare his life forfeit, and say to you that he will be executed in public at this hour 1 day hence. Return now to your homes and have done with this madness. I, your emperor, command each of you personally. You who are vested with authority, return to your duties." The sonorous voice ceased, and Jean felt herself being raised from the marble slab. She opened her eyes. The golden mask had been lifted from the face of the executioner. He had dropped the knife and now held a sword in his hand. It was Max's. He whispered, "Under the platform, quick. There's an underground passage back into the palace. You'll be safe." Jean was bewildered. As she descended, she saw that the crowd had surged backward, leaving an open space between the platform and the palace. Maxis turned and ran toward the open space. A small group of Martians was running forward from the building. They were led by Pandic with a sword in his hand. From another doorway, Rex ran to join Maxis. He was unarmed. One of Pandek's group turned and swerved out to intercept him. Like a great cat, Rex crouched, waiting. The Martian moved in. Rex went under the vicious swipe of the Martian's sword and caught the Martian's arm and spun him around. Before the Martian could recover his balance, there was an arm around his throat, pressure on his spine. He screamed as his spine snapped. Rex raced on to join Maxis. The guards in the square had now chosen sides. A few rallied behind Pandek. By far the majority took their stand behind Maxis. Their number doomed the smaller group. But Maxis held up his hands. "Stand back, all of you. Come forward, Pandek. You think so highly of your swordsman's skill. Let me see the proof. Just we two." Pandek was not slow in accepting the challenge. He came forward and the two Martians circled cautiously in the open space between the two opposing forces. Pandek seemed the better of the two. Maxis fought mainly on the defensive, his play unspectacular, which made Pandek's thrust seem all the more brilliant. Pandek evidently felt any retreat was a mark against him. Not so with Maxis. He retreated whenever it was made necessary by Pandek's able thrusts. Pandek sneered. Maxis fought stolidly, doggedly, until Pandek made the mistake of losing regard for his foe's ability. He thrust smartly and did not maintain the balance necessary for retreat in case of a quick counterattack. The counterattack came. Suddenly, Max's blade was everywhere. Pandek retreated in order to regain his balance and reassume domination of the match. Maxis never gave him the chance to do this. Always, Pandek was a scant second too late in parrying a thrust to balance himself for the next. He fell. Maxis moved in swiftly. For a moment he stayed his thrust, hoping. And what he hoped for came to pass. Pandek's courage broke. With terror in his eyes, the fallen Martian shouted, "Stop! I am of royal blood! Don't you dare kill me!" Maxis smiled and drove his blade home. As he drew it forth, he glanced at Pandek's waiting group. Brave men all, who had espoused the losing cause openly. To a man they were throwing down their swords, their eyes on the dead Pandek, contempt on their faces. The contempt of men who suddenly realized they had been led by a coward. Men who were ashamed. Maxis sheathed his blade and looked up to where Fairman, Lord of the Northern Hemisphere, raised his hand in salute. Maxis bowed. Then he turned to Rex. He said, "It's over, my friend. The fuse has been snuffed in time. We will be eternally in your gratitude. It's the other way around. We're getting out of this little affair with whole skins. That's something to be really thankful for." From the diary of Tommy Wilkes. What a story I'll have to tell. I guess I'm about the luckiest kid on Mars right now, because when I get back, they're going to let me tell what happened. I've got it all written down so I won't forget anything. I've got it up to the time we left Rex and the Martian in the passageway behind the wall. Rex didn't tell me all that happened, but when Maxis got back there, after hearing the noise, he found Pandek on the floor unconscious. Rex said Pandek came at him with a sword, and he was pretty sure Pandek would kill him, but Pandek missed a thrust, and Rex got in a lucky grab and pushed a nerve on Pandek's neck. He made it sound very easy, but I'll bet Rex is about the best nerve fighter in the world. That's what they call men who can kill with nothing but their bare hands. Anyhow, they brought Pandek upstairs and Maxis wanted to kill him, but Fairman said no, that Pandek should be kept alive until the rebellion was over, if it ever was. They talked about what they'd do, but Fairman made the final decision because he was the emperor. He said he wanted to reveal himself to the people at a dramatic moment, because that was what had an effect on crowds. He decided the most dramatic moment would be while the knife was raised over Gene. So they took Pandek to a room and tied him up, and Maxis took his place. Maxis's job was to call the crowd's attention to Fanton at the right instant to heighten the dramatic effect. He was also supposed to look scared to death so the crowd wouldn't swing Pandek's side against the Emperor. It all worked swell except for one thing. Some traitor guards came and let Pandek out. If Pandek had gone after Fanton, it all might have ended differently. That's what Rex said. But Pandek got rattled and went after Maxis instead. Maxis killed him, even though Pandek was a much better swordsman. Now to me, that doesn't make any sense. I asked Rex about it, but he just smiled and said Pandek was better than Maxis except for one thing. Guts. That's a funny term that means courage. I wonder where Rex heard it. Probably on Earth. Anyhow, everything is fine now. The people are behind Fanton, and he's coming back to New Iowa with us and wants to go on to Terra for a goodwill visit. He wants to open the northern country to Terrans and trade scientific secrets. Right now, I'm in a room they gave me to sleep in while we're here. I saw Gene and Rex walking in the garden down below. He was kissing her. Or maybe it was the other way around. End of Part 6. End of Secret of the Martians.
Thank you for listening to this chapter. If you'd like to keep following this story or discover more fascinating tales, be sure to subscribe to our channel and enable notifications. We look forward to sharing the next exciting chapter with you. Until next time.